Hi, everyone. This is Lisa Schmidt, and I'm going to talk to you about the flipped classroom. So, the current situation with schools closed makes education an interesting challenge. I have posted a few articles on my webpage about teaching with Zoom. There's an article about why Zoom calls drain your energy, and a podcast about Maslow before Bloom. So, some things that you should take into consideration before trying to do a 2 hour long lecture over Zoom with your students. So, in a flipped classroom, what you would do is you would give your students an assignment to do at home. They would do the assignment at home and they would come to class and they would actually practice what they learned at home or ask questions or discuss what they learned at home. Um, So that could be giving them a video to watch, you making a video of your lecture for them to watch, or having them read something. But at any rate, they do the work at home and then they come to the classroom prepared to practice what they have learned. I did create a page about the flipped classroom, and I have a sample lesson using the flipped classroom model. So you can see that how easy it is to do. And it's something that is probably a good skill to have in the current situation. So I have some examples here about what students might do in a flipped classroom. They could do something like watch an online lecture, like what you are doing now, review course material, read physical or digital text, participate in an online discussion, or perform research. And things like that can be done at home while what they would do in the classroom, or in this case, what you might want to do with them on Zoom rather than giving them a 2 hour long lecture is practice whatever skill you have taught them in the lesson. Have a discussion with you or with their classmates. Have a debate. Do presentations. Have station learning or lab experiments, and they can also do peer assessment and review. And then I have a link here about the definition of the flipped classroom so you can read some more information about it. What I'd like to do is show you how to flip the classroom. So I have a PowerPoint here. We'll call this the lesson. And since the majority of my classmates here are history majors, I'm not going to talk in depth about the things here. But just as an example, so here is the lesson, Tools of the Historian. And so we know that history is taught using primary and secondary sources. And your secondary sources are things like textbooks. And your primary sources are things like original documents or other materials that have not been changed in any way. And I have some examples here of what primary sources are. So here are examples, and then here's some information about particular examples. And I tried to give links to each of the different types. Historical photos, I didn't give links to because there are just so many out there. But looking at a photo can help students because they can see things in a photo that you wouldn't find in the writings of a textbook per se. Audio recordings, and I have a link here for oral histories from the New Deal, because during the Depression, people were actually paid to go and interview older Americans and record their stories. And one of the videos I've put in here is Johnny Cash reading The Trail of Tears, which can be an interesting way to present the Trail of Tears to students rather than them just reading about it in the textbook. Historic videos, like I gave some examples here of immigrants coming off of ships onto Ellis Island, and Berlin, what it looked like in July of 1945 after World War II was over. Things like this can help students to see a perspective that they wouldn't get from a textbook. Historical films, like the one I put here, is of the construction of Hoover Dam. Journals, letters, and diaries. And I put an example picture of Anne Frank's diary here. which probably everyone is familiar with, and hopefully you understand how a diary could give you a better perspective on a historical event than a textbook can, and also give a different perspective than what the textbook normally would. Speeches are another good primary resource, and here's a link to Rhetoric, where there's hundreds of different speeches published, some of them videos and audio recordings, and some of them just text. Scrapbooks can also be an interesting source of a primary source. Newspapers can also be an interesting primary source. Like the example I put here is newspaper headline from just before the Japanese were interned in California during World War II. It's one thing to read it in a textbook, but it's another to see what the newspaper had to say about it. Government publications can lead to interesting discoveries, like E.D. Morrell. E.D. Morrell's book, The Black Man's Burden, was written because he discovered slavery was happening in the Congo just by looking at shipping records and realizing that people in the Congo were not being paid for their labor. Oral histories are another perspective on history that obviously, if it's oral, it's not written in the text, but I have a video of Native American storytelling and oral history, and I have a link to oral and video history collections from the Library of Congress. Oral histories are another good way to give students a perspective that they wouldn't get from a textbook. Autobiographies and memoirs that were written at the time of whatever event you're studying could be good ones. And I give a link here to 50 of the best memoirs, or the best memoirs of the past 50 years. Artifacts like clothing, costume, furniture. So museums, of course, are a great source of artifacts, but if you can't go to a museum, there are lots of online collections, and so I put a link to libraries and museums that have digitized collections. That can be an interesting way to engage students when you can't meet in the classroom and you can't take them on a field. Research data can also be helpful. And things like songs and poems. This one, Following the Drinking Gourd, comes from the time of the Underground Railway. They gave directions to escaped slaves to help them get to the north in the song. And that can be an interesting way to present the topic to the students. And so basically, like, everything has a history, and primary sources are an excellent way to make history come alive for students. But for every different item that we study, there will be different primary sources, and your job as teachers will be to find relevant sources for what you will teach and who you will teach it to. Don't worry, though, there are so many resources available that you will probably have more than you will ever have time to cover. So that is my short lesson. And now the assignment, I put Padlet here so that you can familiarize yourself with using Padlet and see how you can use Padlet to collaborate online. So my assignment for you is to pick a standard from the California State History and Social Science Standards, anything from grades 6 through 12. Pick one standard and then find a primary source that you could use to help students teach that standard. And so then what I want you to do is post your standard and post your primary source here on the Padlet. And so I will give you an example. So here I have the standards pulled up. I would like to use something from 8th grade history. So from 8th grade history, standard 8.8.2 says describe the purpose, challenges, and economic incentives associated with westward expansion, including the concept of manifest destiny. For example, the Lewis and Clark expedition, accounts of the removal of Indians, the Cherokees' Trail of Tears, settlement of the Great Plains, and the territorial acquisitions that spanned numerous decades. So I'm going to use that as my standard. I'm going to come back here to the Padlet, and I'm opening a Padlet. In the title, I want you to put your name. So here, so the standard is 8.8.2, and here is the standard. And on LibriVox, one of the tools that I explained in my earlier video, there is Lewis and Clark, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. So in the years of 1804, 1805, and 1806, two men commanded an expedition which explored the wilderness that stretched from the mouth of the Missouri River to where the Columbia enters the Pacific, and dedicated to civilization a new empire. So this is an audiobook. You can see here are the different chapters here, and this is something that could be used as a primary source to teach about Lewis and Clark. And so here I will put my link. And so there you have it. Here's the standard, and here is the primary source. So that is your assignment. Find a standard, find a primary source, and post it to the Padlet. And then you can see how we have used the flipped classroom model, and hopefully we can have an interesting discussion about this rather than having a lecture about primary sources when we meet on Zoom. Thank you.